All right, Harry. One of my favorite books in the Old Testament is the Book of Job, right? What do we know about this book?
Yeah, it's actually quite unique. It's a mystery book, and I've really, truthfully, not like you, I haven't read it a lot. I just read it recently, and I've been rereading it, and I find it interesting. It doesn't tie in with any other Bible books. It doesn't have common characters, except for God, of course, um, and Satan. There are no other people mentioned. But it does make, but what is interesting to place it in time, it mentions the Sabaean and the Chaldean raiders. Not that they're important in a sense, except that
But
they're
do we
kind of,
can we like figure out a time plan of when those people were around?
yeah, they're kind of the same vintage as Abraham, or maybe a little earlier, so to speak. So that gives us some clue. It also said that Job lived 140 years after this event that happened in his life. So I'm guessing he would have been maybe 100 because he was a wealthy man. He would have had a good length of time, but maybe 60 at the low end. But so if you combine that together, he'd be 200 to 240
How
years.
did somebody live 200, 240 years? How is that possible?
Well, you see, before the flood, people lived about 900 years, kind of, and then after the flood, Shem, I think, lived about 600 years, the son of Noah, and the next son lived maybe 300, and so on. And about 4 or 5 generations later, they were down to 2 to 300 years. So there, that was so. That was where you would place Job because that's the same vintage. So Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, who were uh, 2,000 years, 2,000 years before Jesus, um, uh, they lived about 170 years. So I would think that likely about 100 years before Abraham is where I would think it would be. Um, so who could have written this book? If you start thinking about that, well, would it be Job or one of his friends? But
I don't think
there's
so.
several problems with that. First of all, it tells you that he did live 140 years after the event. So that would have been hard to have
He's
them
not
right.
predicting his death, is what you're saying. He's like, I'm gonna die on this day right here.
The other problems, two other problems. One is printing. Okay, in the time, let's go back to the time of Moses. Sorry, Moses. So this Abram was 2,000 years before Jesus, Moses 1,500. So the time of Moses, printing in Egypt was really common. And they have paper, ink, all that stuff. And Moses was trained in Egypt for 40 years, smartest man in the country, I'm sure, because he really didn't have a job except to get smart. And he was a royal family and that kind of stuff. So he would have learned all this stuff. But 500 years or 600 years before that, it would have been really hard because printing would have not been a normal thing. And and so and
Yeah, so
also
it probably would have been really hard for Job to be able to write something when times when writing didn't really exist too commonly. And another
no,
question, so if it might have been Moses, then where did Moses get this information from, or how could he have possibly have known this?
yeah. Well, just to digress one more time, if the book had been written 500 years before Moses, who would have kept it safe all that time? Okay, so that keep that book. So going to Moses, Moses had, of course, we know that that's given to us that the first 5 books of the Bible that Moses wrote them. So the books 2 to 5, he experienced them. But the book of Genesis, that's kind of an oddball because that's kind of along all from 4,000 from 2,000 excuse me from 2,500 years. The Garden of Eden was 2,500 years before Moses until Abram was 500 years before Moses. All that in Genesis, that detail would have been lost. There's no way they could have kept that. They would have had some vague ideas and just made the rest of the story up. But that's not what we have. We have accurate details all along. So, what was the answer, Justin?
Well, I'm assuming that Moses got it with God when he had spent the 40 days with him, or twice he spent those 40 days, and even some other times, right? So when he was meeting with God, he was able to write down everything that God told him to do and get that accuracy for times when he wasn't around, like Genesis as the example and the book of Job. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, because in Exodus 34:27, I think, and on, God tells Moses to write when he is with him on the mountain. So how much did he write? We don't know, but we have all this detail. Would God have remembered what was happening in the book of Genesis?
Of course.
He was there. Yes, he was the only one there. And so the book of Job, in all that detail, we have to remember too in the book of Job that the first two chapters and the last five chapters is God and Job visiting back and forth and other things, and also the details of what happened in heaven when God met with Satan and had the challenge and so on. All that detail, God would have known about it. And then we have all those 35 chapters in between where Job and his friends are dialoguing. Um, like how would have kept track of all that except that God was there and he would have known that. Um, so then of course after Moses, it is really easy to keep the books together. That is really simple because the whole Levite tribe of what Moses was one of, they were dedicated to the service of God. And what is their dedication is scribes. We talk about the scribes. These people were writers. Moses was really clear about writing because he learned that in Egypt. He would have taught a few people and they would have taught others. And before long, they were just writing lots of stuff. And so all the teachings, and then so if the book of Job had been brought forward at that time, it would have been no problem to keep it going. Um, uh, and of course, God could have kept it some other way, but He always includes people to participate in what is happening. And God does protect His word. But my belief is that the stories are accurate, like Genesis and Job, and that God dictated these to Moses. There's a lot of obscure information there that only God could have known, and so my opinion is that the book of Job is really a nice book. I believe it's really interesting, but specifically, I would really encourage everybody to read the first two chapters and the last five chapters a lot of times. That is the story of God dialoguing with Job and also Job, just exactly what happened. The in between 35 chapters are more him and his friends, but there's lots of good God information about what God in the creation and stuff like that, about the Leviathan and the dragon and all those things that are those animals that are not around anymore, the dinosaurs that he talks about. Really interesting read, really fascinating read, and to also get to know more about God, how he thinks. And again, I agree with you now. It is a really interesting book, and I do believe it was accurately kept. I don't know who else could have written it. Moses would have been a good option. That's just an opinion. I
All
can't
right.
I can't prove that, but I do like the way Genesis is written, and it seems to have the same flavor. Yeah,
Yeah.
God dictated, I believe.
Amen. Thanks, Harry.